He didn't ask for the stool, he didn't look at the clock, he didn't even know how tired he was, because by the time exhaustion arrived, it was already too late. That's the misunderstanding people have about old-school boxing conditioning. They think it was about running more miles, sparring more rounds, or training harder for the sake of pride. It wasn't. It was about fear. Fear of what happened when conditioning failed, because when conditioning failed back then, the fight didn't stop, the opponent didn't slow down, the punishment didn't soften, and there was nowhere to hide.
Willard wheels around the ring, powerless, with Dempsey pumping right and left into him. Clear across the opposite corner, and there he's taking it again. How can the man stand it? And there he falls, his gloved hand feeling for the rope, trying to hold himself up.
Old-school fighters trained the way they did because the fight would expose every weakness they carried into the ring. Conditioning wasn't preparation, it was insurance. Picture the moment they trained for. Not round 3, not round 6, round 13. Your mouth is dry, your lungs burn every time you inhale. Your legs feel like they belong to someone else. Sweat drips into your eyes and blurs your vision. The noise of the crowd fades. All you hear is breathing, yours and his. And he's still walking forward. That moment didn't arrive by accident. It was guaranteed. Every old fighter knew it was coming. So they trained for that moment. Not for comfort, not for sharpness, not for style. They trained for collapse. Sugar Ray Robinson learned this lesson the hard way, before the loss, before the myth cracked. He entered the ring against Jake LaMotta undefeated, confident, and brilliant. 40 wins, 0 losses, speed, elegance, timing, everything people associate with greatness. LaMotta didn't care. He leaned on Robinson, forced exchanges, hit the body, made him work every second. He didn't outbox Robinson, he exhausted him. Robinson lost his first fight, not because he wasn't skilled, but because he hadn't yet learned how to fight when the fight stopped being beautiful. That loss haunted Robinson, and it changed how he trained. From then on, Robinson didn't just run for fitness, he ran to suffer. Long road work at dawn, miles before breakfast. Not chasing pace, chasing fatigue, learning how to breathe through it, learning how to stay calm when the body panicked. So when Robinson fought LaMotta again, and again, and again, he didn't just beat him with speed, he outlasted him. That's conditioning. Old-school conditioning was built around one brutal truth. Fatigue makes cowards of skill. When you're fresh, everyone boxes well. When you're tired, everything you are gets exposed. Fear shows up, doubt shows up, panic shows up. Old fighters trained to meet those emotions early, so they wouldn't freeze later. Jack Dempsey understood this before anyone explained it scientifically. Dempsey's training wasn't technical, it was relentless. Hills, chopping wood, endless shadowboxing, conditioning that punished the lungs and legs long before the fight did. When he fought Jess Willard, a giant champion nearly 40 pounds heavier, people expected size to matter. It didn't. Because Willard wasn't trained to move, think, and fight at that pace. Dempsey was. 7 knockdowns in 1 round didn't happen because Dempsey was stronger. They happened because Willard was drowning. That's conditioning as a weapon. This is where modern fans struggle. They think old fighters were tougher people. They weren't. They were trained for harsher consequences. Back then, there were no 8-round feel-out fights. No early stoppages, no referees stepping in because a fighter was taking too much damage. 15 rounds meant 15 rounds. If you slowed down, the other man didn't wait. Conditioning was the only defense when technique failed. And technique always fails eventually. Rocky Marciano is often misunderstood because he didn't look like a technician. But Marciano understood conditioning better than almost anyone. He knew he wasn't the fastest, he knew he wasn't graceful, he knew he would take punishment early. So he trained for the moment when the other man broke first. Marciano ran miles every day, sometimes after full gym sessions, sometimes when his body begged him not to. Not because it was smart, but because he needed to know he could keep going when the fight turned ugly. Against Ezzard Charles, Marciano absorbed round after round of clean punches. Charles boxed beautifully early. But late, Marciano was still there, still pressing, still throwing. Conditioning made the difference, not talent. Old-school conditioning wasn't measured in heart rate or recovery metrics. It was measured in whether you could still throw punches when your arms felt dead. Joe Frazier was built entirely on this idea. His style required relentless pressure, constant bobbing, constant forward movement, no pauses, no retreats. That style is impossible without elite conditioning. Against Muhammad Ali, Frazier didn't just test Ali's chin, he tested his lungs, forced him to work, forced him to move, forced him to defend. That pressure came from road work, from brutal camps, from pushing beyond fatigue in training so fatigue wouldn't surprise him in the ring. Conditioning turned pressure into dominance. Here's something rarely said honestly. Old fighters trained obsessed because boxing wasn't a lifestyle. It was an escape. Most fighters worked brutal jobs. Factories, construction, docks, mines. Fighting was the way out. Losing didn't mean embarrassment. It meant going back to the grind that was destroying their bodies anyway. So they trained like failure wasn't an option. Conditioning was survival. Sparring reflected this. Old fighters sparred often, hard, not because it was healthy, but because fights were worse. Sparring was meant to exhaust you, to test your breathing, to see how you reacted when tired. If you faded in sparring, you didn't belong. That's how conditioning became culture. If you know Henry Armstrong, and if there is one lesson that young fighters can take from Henry Armstrong, it is to stay busy throughout the year. Unlike many fighters today, Henry Armstrong never had periods of inactivity. Even though he enjoyed nightlife and partying, Armstrong was in the ring so often that there was rarely time to get out of shape. In the busiest year of his career, Henry Armstrong fought 27 times. At first glance, you may be wondering if that is a typo. It is not. Henry Armstrong had 27 professional fights in 1937. He had 9 fights between July and September alone. Many of today's fighters are lucky to have 2 or 3 fights in an entire year. Is it really any surprise that most lack the endurance of yesteryear's legends? Staying busy is not just about staying in shape. Henry Armstrong had much more than endurance. He was a gifted fighter who once simultaneously held world championships in 3 different weight classes. Fighters in today's era are often far too concerned about supplemental strength and conditioning, and not concerned enough with actually boxing. If you want to improve as a boxer, you need to box. To improve at any activity, you need to perform the activity. Unfortunately, many athletes overlook this seemingly obvious advice. Everyone wants to know what exercises to perform, rather than spending more time performing their sport. And I say this not to suggest that supplemental work cannot be useful. Such work can certainly be beneficial, but must never take precedence over the actual sport. 15 rounds demanded something modern. Boxing doesn't. Pacing pain. You couldn't explode early and hope for a quick finish. You had to live inside discomfort for an hour. That changed how fighters trained. Long rounds, long sessions, endless repetition under fatigue. You weren't training to look sharp. You were training to stay functional. Watch old fights closely. Hands drop, feet slow, form breaks. But the fighters keep fighting. They still defend, still throw, still think. That ability doesn't come from talent. It comes from repetition under exhaustion. You can't learn it fresh. Conditioning was mental before it was physical. Old fighters learned how to stay calm while tired, how to control breathing, how to accept pain without panic. Fatigue wasn't treated as danger, it was treated as normal. That's why they didn't quit. Not because they were fearless, but because conditioning taught them they could endure more than their mind suggested. Modern fighters are smarter, safer, better protected, but they're trained for a different reality. Shorter fights, more breaks, more interventions. Old fighters trained for inevitability. The inevitability that at some point, you would be tired, hurt, and scared, and the fight would continue anyway. And here's the cost that gets ignored. Old school conditioning destroyed bodies. It shortened careers, it ruined joints, it left fighters broken long after retirement. Many paid for their toughness with years of pain. But obsession doesn't negotiate. They accepted the cost because the alternative was worse. That's why old fights feel different. The pace, the grit, the refusal to fade. You're watching men trained not to seek comfort. You're watching conditioning become identity. Old school boxing conditioning wasn't better because it was smarter. It was better because it was necessary. Because fatigue wasn't managed. It was exploited. Because weakness wasn't protected. It was punished. Because the fight didn't care how tired you were. And the fighters knew it. Today, boxing has evolved. And that's good. But something irreplaceable was lost. Not courage, not heart, but the understanding that conditioning wasn't preparation. It was who you were. Old fighters didn't train to be ready. They trained to be unbreakable. The bell rang. They were still standing. And that was enough.